You know, there's this video I used to watch. In fact, I love watching it. It's Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She is addressing, I think, the class of 2019 at Yale University. And in that speech, she mentions that there's a woman who made a humanely human mistake, if that makes sense, when she tried saying her name. She ended up calling her fried burrito, according to her. And so I was thinking, how am I going to introduce you? I know you're Wandile, but how do I say your surname? How do I pronounce your surname? That's always been a challenge, and that's my confession, my friend. Is it Tsabedze? I can't say it. Yeah, that's autista, actually. How do I say it?
It's Tsabedze. But then you are Zulu, you should know it. You should try to change it. It's from Tsabedze, you say Tsabedze.
Tsabedze.
Tsabedze, yes.
Tsabedze.
Yes.
It sounds a bit Zulu-ish, but it also sounds interesting. So I'm gonna leave it at that.
It's Tsabedze.
But your research looks into the mental health of correctional service personnel. Those would be your inmates. And I saw in one of the articles, you also look at staff working in correctional service facilities. I'm very interested. Why do you look at those? Should we even care about inmates to begin with?
Okay. That's a very interesting question. And everyone, when asks me that question, I always give them my background to say, when did the interest of inmates or offenders started? I grew up in, I would say, in a semi-military quarters where all your warders and your waitresses stays there, the correctional staff stays there. So when I grew up there, I would literally say I was raised by, I learned to be a man from offenders because they taught me respect. They taught me how to interact with people, and it taught me a lot of things. Some I cannot even mention them because I was a very naughty child. So when I was there, we were taught not to call them in Siswati. There is a name. He said I call them Dibo Shwa, which means prisoners. And we were told not to call them that. We were told to call them Bomalume, you know.
Hey.
The naughty part of me is that, remember, Bomalume or offenders are not allowed to have money, but they always had money, and they would send me to the shops to go and buy cigarettes. And when I get to the shop, I would say my uncle sent me, you understand? And they would not ask because I was in grade 1. Yeah, that's 1986. 1985, 1996. And I would say my uncle sent me. So when we sit down and they will have, I will eat your rabbits, they will kill rabbits, and then we sit, they will cook, I will eat with them. So from there, I tend to get interested to them, you understand? I remember at home, there was an old man, I think he was close to like 60s, 70s. We used to call them cool. We used to call him cool. So from there, I went to school. Fast forward the story, I also worked in correctional in Swaziland for 2 years, 6 months, and then I resigned, I went back to school. So my background for working with offenders started there, and when I was in correctional in Swaziland, I learned a lot from them. And I learned respect. Other than anything else, from offenders, I learned respect. And they made the man that I am today, because I'll sit down and tell me your story. And from their story and their experiences and why they are here, there's a story behind that, you understand? So I learned to say, I would drift away from judging them before I even hear the story. What really happened? Some might be true, some might not be true. But from there, I decided, you know what? After my master's, I'm going to do my PhD in the space of corrections. And the only thing I was interested on was to do my PhD in maximum in Swaziland, because those are the ones that I will spend most of the time with them. And when I come out of there, I'll be having a lot of things and a lot of thoughts when it comes to around men in corrections. Because if you can look right now here in South Africa, in fact, even at home in Swaziland, most of the correctional facilities are housing men. And only one back at home, which is female in the whole country. So it says a lot about the mental health space of men in corrections and all of offenders. Yeah.
Sorry, when you say there's only one for women, do you mean here in South Africa or in Swaziland?
I mean, in Swaziland, there's only one. And here in South Africa, I'll speak of the space where when my students are doing research and also I'm doing research. I'll give you here in Gauteng, the ones that my students, when you look at the ratio or the number of here in South Africa, when you look at the number, or they call it lock-in, lock-out number in the space of women, they are fewer than men. Even here in South Africa, you can go to Sun City, there are few women there than men. You can go to Kosimampuru, where I'm doing my project there. There are few women than men. So it speaks volume in the space of men and correction.
Okay. Wow. You then focus your research on males alone, and I get why, listening to what you're saying. But then, has it never sparked interest in you to sort of like look into women as well? Because I would assume they also need to, why is your focus mainly on men? Is it because of that experience with them when you were growing up, or there's some sort of an unknown bias?
No.
And you know why I would ask this question?
I know that. So when it comes to the space of men, the stories of men, mostly, I would say, when you listen to the story of men, what happened? There's most of the time it has to do with lacking of the father figure. You'll find that I wanted to be a man at a younger age, but I didn't know what is happening, you understand, in my life. I was involved in gang, and not forgetting that I would say low-middle income countries, the most thriving of crime is motivation of crime, which will be poverty, you understand? And also the culture around what is a man must, you understand? So mostly I was interested in that because most of, I would say the offenders, when I sit down and then they tell their stories, there's the motivation behind wanting to show that I'm a man, you understand? And culture plays a role in that, you understand? So I look at that and I was like, there's really something that is saying about our culture and men. And that's what, and also, I'll give you an example to say peer pressure, and that's also being motivated by our culture and traditions. So I'll give you an example to say, why am I not focusing on women? There was really less interest on women, you understand? And when I look at my results in my PhD, I find out that there were not much stories of women. And I would say I made a promise to myself to say students that are going to go forward, that I'll mentor or supervise, I would love them to look at women. Currently, I've got a student who's looking at the grieving process of women, you understand? And to say in the African context, as women, they've got certain way of grieving, but when you're in corrections, because they close up space, there are things that there are some certain rituals and traditions, practices that you cannot do as a woman. So for me, to answer your question, is that it's the background growing up with this man and reflecting back as a young man to say they used to tell me these stories. I wonder what were these stories true? You understand? And I never spent most of the time with the women. You understand? Because I was in a men camp, and then going forward, I said I would like to hear the stories of women. You understand? And why did it happen? And how did this happen? So I'm in the process of finding more stories, but then now because I'm in the field, my students will do the research most of the time to say, go and hear these stories, those ones that are interested. So I hope I've answered your question. So it was the background and also looking at the number of correctional centers that houses men. It speaks volume, you understand? And I would like to be very typical and say black men, you understand?
Okay.
What does it say about us? Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. And it then brings me to the ethics question. How easy is it to get ethical clearance for this kind of research? Because you need to deal with people that are considered high risk, especially if you're working with In fact, it doesn't really matter whether it's your young adults or your senior adults. It doesn't matter. But I would assume the younger ones are more riskier. How do you then get away with ethics?
A good question and a very interesting. And I hope our students will be listening to this and watching it. So ethics when it comes to corrections, because they are regarded as vulnerable group, the offenders. It's very tense. It's very rigor. And it needs one to be patient. I always tell my students to say that if you're doing work in correction, you need to be patient. You need to be very understanding, because the ethics committee really will grill you. I'll give you my experience as for my PhD. I stayed for 9 months in ethics. Let me tell you why. I submitted the first time, it was deferred. And reason being deferred is that they don't think I'm capable or I have the capacity of doing this research in corrections, more especially that I included maximum correction. So I remember my supervisor was not around, he was in Germany for research. And we had to write 2-page motivation. I had to submit my CV. I had to get a recommendation letter from corrections back at home to say that I worked there for 2 years, 2 months, 6 months, and I've got the experience of working with offenders. You understand? And also, it was a lot of things that I have to submit to prove that I have the capacity. And also, currently, one experience of my student, because of his peers moving forward, I had to sit him down and say, you are doing study with corrections. Highly possibilities are your work will be deferred when you send it for the first time. Surely it was deferred. It was not a methodology error. It was not that the study doesn't make sense, but the ethics committee wanted to find out, to say, are we capable? Does the student have capacity? Is the student familiar with the environment? You understand? What is the motivation behind? Does he understand that he is dealing with a vulnerable group? I mean, so when it comes to ethics, honestly, you need to be very patient, because you also have to, here in South Africa, you need to submit your work to DCS. You understand? REC, which is the Department of Correctional Services Research Ethics Committee. And recently, my colleague from UNISA in the Inside Out, Outside In space, he presented the stats of approval of rejections. And it was very alarming. And I shared it with my students to say, there's high rate of rejection, because one thing that they also look at is the use of words. You don't call prisoners, there is no prison. You need to be very, yes, I can see a surprise. So those are the things technically that you need to do it. And it will be rejected just on the desk of the reviewers if you use those kind of words. Prisoners, those are not the words that we use in the space of corrections, because we are using the approach of positive, I would say, my colleague used to say positive psychology wording or approach. So those are the things that you need to look at. And so I reviewed one of my students' work, and there was so much prisoners. And I was like, okay, now let's have a class. I need to teach you the space. Yeah. So ethics there is very tense when it comes to getting access to a vulnerable group like offenders.
Are we allowed to refer to them as inmates?
Yes, you can use inmates. Personally, not about anyone else. Personally, I don't like the word inmates. I prefer offenders. We've got preference as researchers in the space of correction. My students, I limit them to use inmates. I prefer offenders, you understand? But then also, when I'm referring to them, I say people living in corrections. I hope I make sense. So yes, you can use inmates, you can use offenders, but I prefer people living in corrections.
Okay. In your article, you speak about high-income countries, and you sort of point us to the mental health care importance for people that are, in your terms, in corrections. I was interested when I read that part to know, what about in Swaziland? You made this assertion that you see a lot of investment going towards mental health for inmates, the term that you don't like in your high-income countries. What about in our countries in Africa? Yeah, we can use Swaziland as a case, because that's where I think you make a lot of theoretical contribution within the context of correctional spaces.
Yeah, I am sure the article you're referring about is the one when it comes to COVID-19. The protocol we recently submitted the scoping review because we're looking at the mental health and how did they cope during COVID-19. So in that article, in the space of mental health, I hope I'll answer the question correctly. In the space of corrections and mental health, there's really a high need of investment. Why am I saying this? I am saying this because if you look at how many men are housed in corrections, and after release, where do they go? They go back to their community. And I'll give you an example. The correction space in our context of Africa, we use one umbrella when it comes to rehabilitation, of which rehabilitation is expected to be taking care of the mental health, equipping the offenders to go back to the community, reintegration. But then we always use one umbrella, you understand? For one, I'll give you an example. For one, someone that has committed fraud, you'll find you'll find him or her being forced or being said to, you must go and attend anger management course or anger management classes. Does that person need that? No. We need to go back and say, why did this person commit the fraud? You understand? So the mental health space in low-income countries, including Swaziland and South Africa, there's so much need of investing. How can they invest, the government? Firstly, there is a struggling in the recent scoping review that we wrote with my colleagues. There's a struggle when it comes to human resource. What are we talking about human resource? We're talking about psychologists. We're talking about all your multidisciplinary team, your chaplains, your teachers, because they have to be there for catering these, for rendering services of mental health to these offenders. But then there's literally there are not enough human resource. So it questions us in the low income countries to say, how do we take this mental health issue in corrections very serious or not? And also, I'll give you the infrastructure. The infrastructure is still built in the prison approach. You need to question it. You get into the cells. I'll say the dormitory or the cell. When you are there, you're like, this is prison. This is not a unit. This is not a dormitory. You understand? You see the infrastructure plays an important role. And also, we look at the infrastructure, and then we look at the activities that are being rendered to offenders. Honestly, those activities, they don't really cater, they don't go deep to the need of these people. And you question the reintegration to the society of offenders. Why do I question it? It's because of the human resource. Because for one to go back to the community, I'm one in the Tsabedze, I've committed a crime to the community, society. It's more likely that I'll come back. Hence, we talk of recidivism risk. What are the risks of me coming back? You understand? I look at that in my PhD, and I found that when I come into corrections, it's more likely, 9 out of 10 chances, it's more likely that I'll come back to corrections because the community doesn't, I was not well reintegrated to the community, and the community doesn't welcome me back. You understand? I'll be called Sibo Shwa, and then I'll be called one thing. If there's something that has been lost, the first thing to suspect is Wandile because he's from Wandile Banting. You understand? So there's so much that needs to be done, and also cure for the society it's on. There's the need for the cure of the society. You understand? I always use this words. I break the rules always. I say the society is very toxic. You understand? Why am I saying the society is very toxic? I come out, and instead of you welcoming me as an offender, you are not. You're calling me names. Should anything happen, the first person to suspect is Wandile. You understand? So there is so much that needs to be, not only the offenders, but also the society needs cure, needs awareness, needs to be told what is happening in the life of an offender. Because I've been staying in corrections for some time, and when I come back, there's so much that I need to adjust to the society. But the society, usually, they don't welcome offenders, and they will be going back. Recidivism risk or recidivism rate goes high. So that's what happens.
But then who is supposed to drive these conversations? Who is supposed to be the one who teaches about what happens in correctional service facilities, or rather tries to plant in the idea that, hey, these are people, these are not animals? Is it the ministry? Is it academics or any other parties?
I will speak of cooperation. Understand? What do I mean by cooperation? We have, like right recently, UNISA, we have the Inside Out, Outside In community engagement project, which caters for offenders, ex-offenders, and the officials. So that's where we start. We can have academics who can drive this. We can have the ministry. The ministry plays a very vital role because there's nothing that you can do without the ministry being involved. You understand? So the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Corrections, needs to play a very important role. You understand? And then I speak of the corrections itself, the different settings in correction. We need to speak one language. We need to have the drive to say, let's make an awareness about what is happening in the life of offenders, what is happening in the space of correction. So the drive needs collaborative, I would say collaborative care, you understand? Because we are talking about a human being here that needs to go back to the society and be given a chance. But then if this person is not given a chance, it's more likely to go back. And then also you look at how much is being put in, I'll speak in the finance world to say how much budget is being put in the correction space. It speaks volumes. So the state's also invited to say we need to look at, say, how much you spend there to take care of Wandile who's an offender, giving a meal, towels, everything, you understand? So it's really very important. And also organizations. There is an organization that we're currently working with in collaboration with UNISA and the Inside Out community engagement. It's called It's Possible for All. So that organization, the way I always, I'm so happy on how they work because we're in collaboration with them. In that organization, believe me, they only hire offenders, ex-offenders.
Oh, nice.
Yes. So it's such organizations.
You know, when I was a boykie, not a boykie, when I was a boy, when I was still a young man, a young lad, I remember one of our neighbors, a very educated man, and he was a cop, I think, that gentleman. We've got cane fields from where I come. Whenever he needed somebody to do work in his fields, he would go and get an inmate or inmates. And he would say they do a better job. And it's also good for them because it takes them out of those four walls, which can drive them nuts. His words.
Yeah.
So I want to know. So sorry, I want to know. Our current minister has said something close to those lines, saying that inmates must now produce their own food here in South Africa. And I want to know if there is really a correlation between them being active in that manner and their mental well-being.
Definitely. I'll give you an example. I really concur with the minister because I will give you to say, if I always say to people, if there is one world and community that is very rich in all professions, it's corrections. Then, my brother, you will find all professions that you can think of. And they are very talented and they can take care of themselves. I'll give you an example because I said I grew up in the space of corrections in the camp. My grandfather was a farmer in the space of corrections. And from tractor to anything that was done in there, one was still there. May he so rest in peace. Only offenders were doing that job. They were feeding themselves. They had farms. They were goats. They were anything that you can think of farming. Those offenders, they will do a very beautiful job. And I really agree with the minister to say, offenders, given the chance, they can feed themselves. The government will not even have to feed them, given the chance, you understand? So I really agree with that. And also in their mental health, You remember when I'm learning farming, I see myself that I'm capable of doing this. And I already picture myself when I get back home, because we're still ticking the box. Remember, ticking the box, when you mean, when you're looking for a job, do you have a criminal record? You have to tick the box. And that box must be bent anyways. That's a conversation for another day. So we're still ticking the box. So in their mental health, if you show me the capabilities that I never even had when I was outside, now I see myself as a farmer. I'm learning to say how to take care of goats, cows, chickens. You understand? So in my mind, I become a business and entrepreneur to say that when I get out of here, I would have something that I'll put in my mouth, regardless whether I tick the box or not. But I'll be able to be an entrepreneur and book rather the farmers will come to me and buy. You understand? So it really plays a very positive role in their mental health when it comes to that, because they see the capabilities, the blind spots they never saw. You understand? So it's I agree with them. And have you ever been to one patient before you ask another one? Have you ever been in correction space?
I've been to. I'll tell you now. It's in the northern side of Pretoria, Cullinan. I've been to Cullinan, and I've spent a night in Cullinan.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. So, and that space is a very interesting space, trust me. So if you're in that space, there's a lot to learn. There's not always negative things, negative behavior, because they are regarded to have negative people, but not always. Yeah.
Yeah, but I must confess, I wasn't interacting with inmates. I was with staff members there. There's a family friend that stayed there. She's also passed, but we went to see her and we stayed in those houses of theirs. So I can't.
But I meant inside. I meant inside correction.
No, I haven't been.
I challenge you now, given your research field, because I know your research field, livelihoods, look at it in the correction space and see what can you say about livelihoods and the correction space. And you are a farmer. I'm just challenging you. Think about it and see what you can do in the correction space in your research field and trying to collaborate with corrections. There's a lot that you can do with corrections and in research space.
I think that's a good invitation. Maybe outside this recording, you and I can talk about opportunities for collaboration as they relate to farming and correctional services, because I don't think I would be willing to go there by myself. I would be somebody that has been in the space. But given what the minister has said on food production, I think it's a space worth exploring, and we'll take this off air.
Yeah.
The reason, though, why I asked you about the minister's accession and relating that to mental health is because in one of your articles where you speak about the mental well-being of inmates, you indicate that, during the COVID period, certain activities, in fact, most activities, were literally stopped. How did that affect inmates?
Oh, very good question. I love that one. Because it speaks to the project that I'm currently doing to say, look at their psychological well-being and mental health during COVID-19. It really affected their mental health. Remember, offenders, they rely on the outside world most of the time as their relatives. So now, during COVID-19, you yourself, you were in prison, you're in corrections or prison in your own house. Imagine them that they rely on visits. Visitors were cut off because COVID-19 was happening, you understand? So no visitors were coming in, you understand? And also remember that their activities, they play soccer, they play draft, laba, all those activities were taken away from them. And they keep themselves busy with those activities. While I'm still in the project that I'm doing right now, I'm collecting data at Hoshimamburu and Bulukwane. One of my participants said that he was in Maxima and how he knew about COVID-19. He said, I didn't know what is happening because they don't have TVs. It's just a wall. He said,
sorry. for context, it's the second time you're mentioning maximum. I think I have an idea, but for the sake of those that are watching and listening, can you kindly explain what maximum refers to?
Okay, maximum, it means that it refers to, it's a correctional, I would say it's another unit or section in corrections whereby only highly profiled offenders are kept there. Highly profiled offenders, you understand? Give an example, Tsabedze. Definitely he's in Max. So
I was going to say Inanias Mate.
Yes, so those ones are kept in maximum. So in that, he said to me, the offender, he said to me, now he's in medium, he said to me, he saw an official coming in with a mask. And he said, I asked him to say, what is happening? Why wearing a mask today? And then it's like, you didn't know there's something called COVID. Then he was like, what is COVID? You understand? So he says to me, when he was telling his experience and the story, he says to me, I was really shattered because I didn't know. He says, when I was escorted to the clinic, I was told to keep distance. You see that there was no orientation. Already this person is anxious. Already this person is the fear of the unknown, to say, what is happening? I've never been orientated about this. So what happens to this person who's in maximum and who doesn't know about COVID? So during COVID-19, a lot happening with the corrections. They're in prison. And remember also they are given money. One of my participants said that I'm very happy and happy when I heard that, to say the correctional officials started to open an account whereby your relatives will send money and then put their reference to say this is money is for Wandile from Clinisan. You understand? So there was that. They were very innovative. I love that, because they were not able to see their loved ones. And also remember, in corrections, we have mothers, we have fathers who are parenting inside corrections. You understand? Now you don't know, you can't even call them, because now when you call, there must be so much sanitizing, there must be a lot of that was taken away from them. And then they were in the levels of lockdown, they were supposed to have conversation with their loved ones in a window. There must be a window here so that you cannot infect each other. So a lot happened to them when it comes to during COVID-19. And also the facilities. One thing that you have to know, there's so much crowding in corrections. The facilities they were not catering for the 1 meter away when you are sleeping. There's overcrowding. So this speaks to what the infrastructure when it comes to come to the correction settings. So they were always in fear. Once someone is coughing, does he have COVID? Am I going to be infected by COVID? You understand? In that context, that space. So really, I call out to the African context to say, we really need to look at that before another pandemic hit us, because there was so much that are happening in the corrections. And one of my participants mentioned that they didn't even want to interact with officials, because officials were coming outside and they were saying officials are bringing in COVID now to them. You understand? So there was so much fear, there was so much anxiety, there was so much uncertainty. And that affected their mental health, because you are in this space, there's nothing you can do, you understand? Yeah. And you don't have control over it. And when someone comes outside and the quarantine space, there's no quarantine space. So a lot happened in their mental health space. Like I mentioned, so there's so much anxiety when it comes to them during COVID-19.
Earlier on, you said the correctional space has different professions, if you look at the whole chain. But you also indicated that there's a shortage of your mental health professionals, and you made an example of psychologists. And why is that the case? Because for me, those are the first people that should actually be deployed in those spaces. Why is it the case? Why do you see a shortage of mental health experts?
Like I still don't have that answer even now. Recently, I had an engagement with one of my students who's a clinical psychologist and works in corrections. And he says to me, he's leaving corrections. And I was like, why are you leaving corrections, Temba? It's like, the space. it still operates in the, you come at school, you have a psychologist, or a counseling psychologist, you're a chaplain, you're a social worker. When you get to the space of correction, you get a culture shock, okay, organizational culture shock. I was once a counselor. When I got in there, we speak of prison, we speak of corrections, but we work prison. And when you bring someone who is in the space of from school and then wanting to say, I want change, and then they get an organizational culture shock because they are not used to that space. So that's one thing. People will be like, I'm not going to stay in this in the forensic space because maybe it's not for me. You understand? So that space needs passion. You need to have passion for it. One, and also I would like to say there is not much training. When they train you, you are training the Western way, and you are trained generally. So you are going to see the general population. No one tells you really to say, when you're going to do a community service, you're a clinical psychologist, student psychologist, you're going to go to the correction space. And when you get there, you're not ready for the space. You're like, no. I don't think this is my space. You understand? And yeah, and also it comes back to the recruitment of the space of, I would speak in the space of psychologists. There are few psychologists in the country, one, and others go to private, others go to hospitals. And then honestly, like I said, we struggle with the human resource in the African context and or low middle income countries, because there's like, I'll give you an example of the training. Let's start in from the training. You'll find that the university only accommodates 10 students to be trained to be clinical psychologists or counseling psychologists. Then you ask yourself to say, how many of them are going to be deployed, or how many of them are going to be interested in the forensic space, which is corrections? So that also contributes a lot. There's so much that needs to be done. I wish they will be training from undergraduates, and they must accommodate the correction space to say, if you are interested, this is what you do. It has to do with training and the interest of individuals. I got interested in the individuals from a young age. I'm one of those that were interested in the space from a young age. Imagine now you are old, you are a fully fledged clinical psychologist or a counseling psychologist, social worker. Then one says you must go to corrections, and we get a culture shock and say, I cannot work here. You understand? I will just go to private practice.
Look, so you were in the correctional space from a very young age, but you also spent much of your time with old men, which is very interesting for me. But I'm going to move to youngsters now, males and females. I would assume you are more exposed to males. How do young people generally end up in correctional services?
Oh, good question. They end up there. As one of my colleagues who wrote, Dr. Shaban from Stellenbosch, he wrote an article from Swaziland using the Swaziland population. You know what I realized, because I was with him when we were collecting data, what I realized is that parenting is very important. How you parent your kids, you understand, is very important. And so much attention that needs to be given to these youngsters so that they cannot look for attention outside from peers, understand, from the wrong group, you understand. So they end up in correction space because of peer pressure. And also, if I'll give an example, Kunsana is my father, and Kunsana is busy at academia, writing papers, traveling to conferences. When do you get the time to parent me as your child? You understand? I end up being parent. I'll give you an example of the young ones that are there. I would end up being parented by my peers and the wrong group. You understand? There's so much influence in the space. You understand? Kids get into high risk behavior because they spend most of the time at school, and then you come back, you find your father, he's just busy in the studies of writing an article, making a dissertation, or reading proposal for the kids. There's no time. You don't sit down of, let's sit here, sake involved. You understand? So back then, there was a time whereby parents will have time for their kids. Fathers will have time for their boys and girls. You understand? But right now, all parents are much motivated that I want to provide for my kids, but they forget that you provide financially, but you're absent emotionally. You understand? That impacts the child's mental health. You understand? And if you are an absent father and an absent mother emotionally and psychologically, the child will look for that somewhere else. You understand? There should be a way of filling that space. You understand? Might be taking them to best schools, but that aspect of being present emotionally, psychologically, socially, you hardly socialize with your kids because you're a very busy father, you're a very busy mother. You understand? Then they end up feeding that aspect with high risk behavior. So they are more likely to end up in corrections because literally there is no one who's parenting them because you're always busy. So I'm calling out and advocating for kids to say parents should sit down and look to say, by the way, why is my child smoking? Why is my child starting to steal and all those things? Yeah, present parenting styles are very important. Me and we're parented differently, very differently. There's so much that there's a difference between them and us. You understand? So yeah.
You're actually making me think. From where I come, our parents/grandparents from our township are well-educated people. I'm talking about your lawyers, your teachers, principals, doctors, etc. And many a times, their boy children end up being substance users. They drink alcohol excessively. Even girl children, by the way, they drink alcohol excessively. And when I look back as you talk, these are people that would always be in their studies doing work, or when they are not there, they would be in the office doing something. If it's not that, it's another commitment elsewhere. And so it's a light bulb moment, really. And it makes me think if one isn't gonna end up being that father, seeing the space that I am in. But I'm hoping now that I know this, I'm hoping that I will be wary of such things. You also speak about a social ecology of resilience in your paper. So what's the role of institutions like church? In fact, I saw there's an article where you spoke about, I don't know this term, it was the first time I was seeing it, religiosity or something along those lines. What's the role of church, schools? Because you also talk about education, and as it relates to inmates, you also talk about family and other institutions. What is the role of these?
That part, remember, religiosity, spirituality, any kind of form of affiliation, it can be any kind. It brings morals, values, you understand, to individuals. Should you move away the religion, should you move away the spirituality part of it, one is more likely to lose their morals, you understand? Yeah. So in that paper, I remember vividly, when we're doing the analysis, I remember that, by the way, I'm in Swaziland, and most of us in Swaziland are affiliated to or believe in, it's either Christianity and Amadlozi ancestors, and both, we do both, believe both, that one has to communicate to the other, you understand? Yeah. So in that paper, what we bring in is that in the background of most offenders, they are grounded by certain religions, certain spirituality and stuff like that. So that grounds them to have certain morals, keep their norms and values. So if you move that away, the person is more likely to engage in risk behaviors or offending behavior, you understand? Because that grounds you, that molds you as an individual. You're like, I'm a Christian, I cannot do this, you understand? I cannot do this, you understand? So that grounds you, you understand? You understand? There's that aspect of respect when it comes to whatever religion that you believe in, you understand? So when you put in that in anyone's behavior, that person is less likely to commit crime because I cannot do this because My religion doesn't allow me that. My spiritual being doesn't allow me to do that. You understand? But then you end up in those space whereby one has done it and has to reflect back to say, why did I do this offense? You understand? So when I refer to that religion really plays a vital role, a very important role, because they mold us. They tell us how we need to behave as people. You may not think of that, but the fact that I have to wake up and go to church and they remind me you must not steal, you must not kill, all those 10 commandments, they mold you and you are more likely not to get into corrections. So that's the space whereby you say, and this is who I am and I cannot do it.
Sorry, we are running out of time now. But again, this takes me back to the point that you raised earlier about I'm going to dwell much on fathers, absent fathers or absent parents. You know, the boy child yearns to be in constant contact with their dad in some form or the other. And I feel like a young boy always appreciates being recognized by their dad. And when the father is absent, that doesn't happen. Now, you find a case of a father who is also a staunch believer who takes the child to church every Sunday, every Saturday. There's those teachings. But when the boy child goes back home, father is nowhere to be found because he's decided to lock himself up in the study room. So doesn't that sort of like create an internal battle within the boy child?
It does. You're very correct. It does, because like you're saying, the whole story of taking the child and building all the morals, but then they're absent. Kids need, kids, you must know that kids needs attention, needs evaluation, needs to be appreciated, and needs you sit with them and then you tell them how good they are. And you need to reprimand them in a fatherly way. You understand? I'll take you back. I'm happy that we're in the same age. And there was back at home, there's something.
I also 21.
Oh, okay. Very interesting. There's something back at home, we call it a Samhain. I'm very happy that I found this Samhain second. What would happen is that when we're coming from Emadlelweni, coming back, and I will find my uncle in Esawen next to the crawl, he will call us, and then we sit and ask you, how was your day? What happened today? You understand? What did you offend? What did you say, baby? Like, you know, when we're doing crazing, and the livestock will go to the neighbors as field, and you get beaten. Fortunately for us, we're beaten. This kids of today, they are not, you cannot do that. You understand? So in that moment of a Samhain, the work you are involved. You understand? Because they will tell you how a man should be behaving, how a man should take care of the family. But then these days, we have your fathers like Brooklyn and Sunday, don't have that time. You understand? The child will come back from school, hey boy, how are you? Or if you ever see that boy, you do your homework. No, I'm busy with it. There he goes to the study room, busy with dissertations and papers and work. You understand? You are a very absent father. And then who raises the kids these days? It's TV, it's radio, it's PlayStation, it's the phone, it's Instagram, it's all this other social media platforms. So you are literally an absent father. And what happens to the child? The child doesn't grow, develop as a whole man or as a whole girl, young girl, you understand, or young man. So we need to go back. That's why I'm saying parenting styles are very important. I was raised by Ukoko, my grandmother and my uncles. Like, they will preach you, they will tell you this is not done this way. So in these days, as parents, young parents, we need to say, how do we parent? Support financially, otherwise the kids must go to the best schools, wear Jordans and all that. But then psychologically, emotionally, are you present? Spiritually, are you present, father? So there's a whole lot that happens to these kids that we are not aware of.
Okay. You speak about corporal punishment now. And many a times you also hear that messes with the psyche of children. should we or should we not discipline them in that manner? That wasn't any of my questions. That wasn't supposed to be any of my questions, by the way. But because you mentioned it, maybe in 10 seconds, you can just indicate whether it is a good or a bad thing for young children.
I mean, I will tell you now. And even in 2 seconds, corporal punishment built who I am today. So, in those words, I think I've said enough.
But you can't use you as a standard. I think that's unfair.
So, to answer your question, I would say, let's try to bring it very slowly. And there's always a motivation behind why you're introducing corporal punishment. Because honestly, if you don't discipline your child, what is going to happen to the child, honestly? That's what I can say, is that discipline, it can be defined in so many ways, but
there are other forms of correcting. You know the term very well. Sitting down with a child and just look, you don't do 1, 2, and 3 for these reasons. Don't you think that is much more effective than hitting a kid with a belt or a shambok?
That's a very effective. Very effective. I'm telling you, that's a positive approach. Sitting with a child, grounding them. But then the question is, are these kids grounded? That's my question. You sit with them so many times, and there's a repetitive behavior, whether you sit with them many times, but then that's a good approach. I don't want to lie. Sit with the kids, talk to them, and you understand. Even for us to be beaten by our uncles, by our grannies, and parents, took them a long time because they've told you 1, 2, 3 for so many times, and they see no change in that behavior. Then they are forced to, you understand? So there's a talking at the end. Then they will end up to say, this is what you need to get.
Got it. So it's a threat. Discipline verbally, and then if you don't listen, you get a good hiding. Exactly. Okay, loud and clear. And maybe as a concluding question, you also talk about resilience intervention programs like Amakawe and Kazimula, which is not for the incarcerated. Can you tell me a bit about those and their important roles in our society?
Oh, yes. It's very important. I'm sure that is the paper that was written by one of my colleagues, Dr. Shabangu from Stellenbosch. Amakawe is made by the resilience programs, because if you look at that program, it's contextualized corrections, African kids. You understand, in Swaziland. So if they are resilient, being resilient is more like, I faced this situation, and then what came out of this situation, you understand? Positivity, you understand? And when I see myself coming out of that situation, I see myself as Likawe, you understand? And I see myself as a Superman, as a victor. So it's very important for us to look at our kids, more especially I'll talk to the ones that are in corrections, to come out as Amakawe, as victors, you understand? They have shown a high level of resilience, you understand? Because that space is it's not a nice space, you understand? A lot happens there, you learn a lot of things. So for you to be called Likawe from corrections, honestly, you should have overcome a lot of behaviors and negativity. So you come out as Likawe, as a victor. So those programs need to be contextualized to our kids, because that paper is all about young offenders, how they see themselves, how they perceive themselves as Amakawe when they come out of corrections. And I must say that shout out to the Correctional Service of Swaziland, because there are so many positive stories from those young men. So that's why they see themselves as Amakawe one day, because that study was done in a school context, you understand, whereby they are being corrected. We spoke of education before. They are being corrected in the education approach. So, yeah. So it's very important to also educate the young.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to drop the links for both the articles that I went through. That is the one that you're referring to now, and the protocol as well, which I think is beautifully written. So that whoever wants to know more about these things can go and read in depth on the articles themselves. Otherwise, I think this has been a very wonderful conversation. I wish we had more time. Unfortunately, we are pressed for time. I truly appreciate this, and please rest assured, and I hope you're going to say yes. I am still going to invite you for another conversation focusing on boy children, only boy children, and fathers and their fathers.
Okay. No, thank you so much, Dr. Claude. I really appreciate this opportunity. It was very interesting for me. And these conversations are not conversations that everyone talks about the correction space and look at it in a positive way. So when you invited me, I was really happy, and I was really very bold to jump in and tell my mentor, Professor Fori, shout out to him, to say, I'm going to talk about corrections. I'm sorry, this is the space whereby I will talk about corrections. And this is a space I will tell the world to say, we need to take care of our loved ones who are in corrections. And I am accepting that invitation. Let's talk about the boy child and let's raise this boy child. And also, one last thing to you, I'm saying, I've read your work. I know where you're working. And in your space of research, I'm like, let's collaborate. Livelihoods for offenders are very important. And your space, I've seen a lot of your work, what you're doing, and I would really appreciate if you can start collaborating with us in the correction space and say, let's look at livelihoods of offenders, and going to the minister's way to say, let them grow their own food. And you are the right man to talk to. So the minister must just,
Most definitely. We're going to take this off air and we'll talk about it in depth. But for now, cheers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kobe. Gabble.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.